Welcome back, Western Journal readers, watchers, and listeners. I'm Andrew J. Shasha, supervising editor of features here at the Western Journal, and today we've got a special guest for you, former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, who is now the president of Young America's Foundation. Governor Walker, thank you so much for being with us today. So a lot of changes in the political landscape right now. Obviously, getting right into a new presidency, we're seeing quite a bit of scandal, quite a bit of progressive policy on the table, and pretty close to being enacted here. So can you just give us a brief look, in your opinion, at the first couple months of the Biden administration?
Well, sadly, it's everything many of us predicted. I remember last August going into the DNC National Convention, which was supposed to be not too far from my home in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I predicted then that for all the talk during the primaries that somehow Joe Biden was a moderate. That was bogus. That's just what Joe Biden had to do to get through the primaries. That was his lane. All the rest of them were in the far radical or the far left radical lane out there. But this is a guy who ran for president multiple times in the past, who spent most of his adult life trying to be the president of the United States. And so he was going to do or say whatever it took. It's exactly what I feared. And when he put Kamala Harris on, it was clear that he's outsourced then, as he has now, his agenda to the radical left of his party. Remember, even though she's much more pleasant and engaging than Bernie Sanders, Newsweek actually reported a year ago that her voting record was actually to the left of Sanders. That means you had someone on a major ticket running whose voting record was further left than a self-avowed socialist. And we've seen that not just in picking Harris, but picking the people surrounding him in his cabinet that work within the White House, his chief of staff coming back. These are all people who not only were radicals in the past, but who really bought into this woke, over-the-top nonsense. I mean, even some of the things that even Barack Obama, I mean, my goodness, even something as simple as, Barack Obama read Dr. Seuss books on March 2nd, the birthday of Dr. Seuss. This year, they can't even do that, for goodness sakes. Pick and choose the books you want, but don't make some grand political statement about that. And then you add the border crisis. It is an absolute crisis. The leader of Mexico the other day was precisely right when he said this is Biden's border crisis, and putting Kamala Harris in charge of it only makes it worse. She's directly a hypocrite in terms of all the things during her own campaign she claimed were wrong and attacking the Trump administration. She's now contradicting herself on. And I worry it's not just that they're incompetent and they've got a crisis they're trying to cover up. I worry the bigger goal is to just flat out have open borders where people can just come right through, assimilate into American society, which if anyone's been to the border, and I've been there multiple times, particularly spending time with my friend Governor Greg Abbott in Texas. And this isn't just people walking over to go work somewhere in America. Most of the action we see on the border is trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking, firearm trafficking. And then the other thing you don't hear much of anything about is I remember looking at the Texas numbers in particular a couple of years ago when I was there, and the biggest number of people they were picking up weren't from Mexico. They were people coming in from countries around the world, including some of the countries that hate us the most. And so I worry there's a real safety issue from a homeland security standpoint. We've got to secure those borders. It is an outrage what's happening to those children, and we should not be reversing policy. But that's exactly what you're getting out of Biden. It's these crazy calls for overreacting on gun control, pushing back against law-abiding citizens instead of focusing on felons. It's dramatic calls for raising taxes, even though he claimed for certain income groups he wasn't going to, which would be like a wet blanket on any recovery. This is just a totally failed administration already 2 months in because they've gone radically to the far left.
And you got at an issue near and dear to my heart, near and dear to a lot of our readers' hearts, the immigration issue. I've been running a series recently on it called Erasing the Line, just about the comprehensive immigration plan that Biden has brought forward that would, a lot of experts have said and told us that, it would erase the line between legal and illegal immigration. Unfortunately, we don't get to see a lot of that in the media right now because the Biden administration has prevented the press from entering these detention centers, which are reportedly far worse off than they ever were during the height of the supposed scandal under Trump. With 700% capacity at a facility in Donna, Texas, with children being kept and not handed over to refugee resettlement for far longer than the 72-hour period. And so how do they get away with this lack of transparency and this clear hypocrisy? The issue is so near and dear to their hearts in the last administration, and now it's far worse, and we're hearing nothing about it. How does the left get away with this?
Well, this is the epitome of, there's no better issue that points out the absolute, not only hypocrisy, but just how in the bag most of the national media is for this president, for his administration, and how just crystal clear how they hated everything about Donald Trump and the previous administration, and they can't even acknowledge from 1 minute the absolute, not just hypocrisy, but the absolute failure. This would just be one thing, and we could point out hypocrisy if they said one thing and did another. But anyone who cares about this issue, I don't care whether you're on the right or the left, you've got to look just at these children and think this is horrible, the conditions they're in. And it's who did not see this coming? When you make it clear that you want people to come in, when you're going to look the other way, when you're going to allow this to happen, when you're going to ease off on the firm stand that Donald Trump and his administration took in the past, did anyone not see this coming? It doesn't take some incredible intellectual leap to get to that conclusion that if you open the floodgates, it's going to come through. And they had no way of dealing with this. That's why my worry over time is that they're going to finally acknowledge it's a crisis, and so that means they just need to just let everyone out and not account for who's coming in and who's coming out. That's just a horrible, horrible plan, not just for those of us who believe in immigration, but that it should be done legally. But it's a horrible, horrible plan, particularly for these children, because with all the issues with trafficking and everything else involved with that, there's almost no way to ensure that particularly the young people who are coming into this country aren't doing so in ways that are really putting them at risk. And so could not be a clear example of the absolute in-the-bag response that so many in the national media have, and how it's doing a disservice to the American people and to these very people who are in these detention centers.
Now, with the media coverage that you're talking about, with the cover that they provide to folks on the left, to the Democratic Party, there's unfortunately and kind of dangerously not a lot they probably can't accomplish and get away with. To you, what is the kind of the most dangerous thing facing the nation right now, facing conservatives right now? Is it the immigration issue? Is it the filibuster? Is it gun control? Is it further attempts at healthcare? What is the biggest threat right now?
Well, I think there's two ways to look at that. You can pick a whole bunch of issues as certainly top threats out there, but I think there's two core ones to the heart of your question. One, overall, not just on policy, but I think it's the media itself. That free press is great, but if it's totally aligned with one political framework, or overwhelmingly so, they're really not holding people accountable. And a classic example that not only at the national but the state level is the media was totally in the bag with Andrew Cuomo. They just thought he was the best thing since sliced bread. Joe Biden called him a gold standard. People like Janice Dean and others were yelling and screaming from the top of any mountain or any building they could find about what was happening in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And finally, the evidence became so overwhelming that it started to come out. But the irony of ironies, and don't get me wrong, I think the allegations against Governor Cuomo when it comes to sexual harassment and beyond are absolutely serious. But it's ironic to me that 15,000 people dying in nursing homes because a year ago tomorrow they put in place an advisory that put people there who were positive with COVID is outrageous, and then tried to cover it up so not only the public but lawmakers couldn't see it or keep the numbers away. That alone should be a reason for him to leave, but it wasn't until these sex stories started to come out that the media and in turn politicians started to pay attention. That's just a classic example of the disservice that happens when you're so in the bag for one political point of view that you just ignore the facts overall. So one, we need a better media. That's actually something that ties into our long game plan at Young America's Foundation, because we know that one of the best things, we're not going to take over CNN or the New York Times as conservatives, but we can train more people to be good investigative reporters, to really get to the heart of not just spending, but issues like this crisis of the nursing homes. And so we're going to be even more aggressive was our National Journalism Center there. The other part of your question is about, what's the number one issue? I'd say without a doubt, it's the Crooked Politician Act. And by that, that's the name I give it. They technically call it H.R. 1 in the House and Senate 1, SB 1 in the United States Senate. That should tell you everything you need to know about the left today. Their number one priority, the first bill that they've introduced, is a bill that's all about taking power for elections away from the states and putting it in the hands of politicians and the federal government. It is a horrible bill, and why I say it's a priority is not just because of elections. Any concerns you had about last year's elections will only get arguably much worse if this bill becomes the law. But why this ties into everything else, immigration, taxes, regulations, you name it, is if they have this power structure in their hands along with the change in the filibuster, then in almost, at least for the foreseeable future, it doesn't matter how we debate in these other issues. It doesn't matter the quality of candidates that run. They will, almost like a third world nation, control the tools of the elections and make it nearly impossible to get any of these other things accomplished. And so that's got to be, I think, for anybody who cares about this personally, this is not YAF's position, but personally, that's got to be a priority for all of us, particularly for people who live in states like West Virginia or Montana or Arizona or even New Hampshire, where there are Democrat senators there who are on the bubble about whether or not to end the filibuster or not, which will determine whether things like this go forward.
And so how do we keep the Democrats' hands off that button in 2022, and how do folks get involved with Young America's Foundation to make that possible?
Well, the good news, one of the best things that came out of the November elections that's largely been glossed over, is that conservative majorities in the states, Republican-led legislative majorities, were not only maintained, they were added to. For all the hype about a blue wave, it didn't happen. Every state that has a Republican majority before the 2020 election kept it going into this year, and 3 more were added, 2 in New Hampshire, 1 in Alaska, as well as a net gain of 1 Republican governor in Montana. That matters for 2 reasons. One, because I'm obviously biased, but I think the real action, as our founders intended, happens in the states. So that's one bit of good news for anybody who's dejected about what's happening in Washington, D.C. But secondly, I think beyond that, even if you look ahead to 2022, particularly at the U.S. House of Representatives, most, not every, but most states are going to draw the boundaries in the state legislature, not only for those legislative seats, but for just about every House seat. There's a few exceptions. There's about 7 states that only have 1 House district, but for every other state, the boundaries are either drawn in some cases by a commission, but in most states by the legislature. Conservatives having overwhelming majorities means that just drawing fair maps, I think, will make it fairly likely that Republicans, if they run good candidates and stay true to their word, will probably regain the U.S. House of Representatives. The Senate, I think, is much more of a toss-up, but obviously if one of the 2 is Republican, I think that offers much more comfort than just relying on the filibuster. And to your final question, how do people get involved? Well, YAF.org is our overall site, YAF.org/longgame. Whether you're a student, you know a student, someone in your family, a neighbor, someone else out there, or you're just a concerned citizen, go to YAF.org/longgame. We'll send you a free copy of our 12-point plan. We'll give you details about how you can help young people get involved in our programs in college and high school, even younger. We'll give you materials if you're a parent and want to help particularly your young kids counter the left-wing Marxist woke agenda that's creeping into our schools increasingly across the nation. Or if you don't have any kids, or your kids are gone and you just want to help us fight to preserve the very foundation of this great nation and make sure it's there for many more generations to come. Again, YAF.org/longgame. We'll get you a free copy and we'll get you engaged.
Hey guys, did you know we have a podcast called WJ Live?
The Western Journal's mission is to equip readers with the truth, and that's the same mission we have on WJ Live.
You'll hear from writers, editors, and special guests on the most important topics of the day.
You can catch us Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern and 2 p.m. Pacific, right here at youtube.com/WJ Live.
While you're there, help us out by subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss any future episodes. See you there.